Happy Fundraising Film Friday. Today, we're going to be talking about middle donors. And, I want to caution you against the perception that middle donors are a certain category or class of people that can give a certain dollar amount. Middle donor programs shouldn't be designed that way. Remember, you're acquiring donors and you're putting them into the base of your pyramid, and then we talk a lot about the strategies for upgrading donors, and I call it climbing the ladder. Taking a $50 donor to 100, a $100 donor to 500, a $500 donor to 1,000, a $1,000 donor to 5 to 10,000, 10,000 to 25. We upgrade donors. We talk about climbing the ladder. What we tend to forget is that middle donor programs, the most successful middle donor programs, are ones that use a middle donor program as a safety net. And what I mean by that is they also allow people that climb up the ladder to major donor status to climb down the ladder back to middle donor status. So instead of lapsing and falling off the ladder, they have this porous level in their donor program that recognizes when donor giving goes down and changes the treatment for them when they move back into that middle donor category. So, you really want to design your program to allow donors to climb up the ladder, but also allow donors to climb down the ladder. Because if you don't do that, I'm telling you what happens is they fall off the ladder. I've seen it time and time and time again. This year alone, I have seen about 12 different files, and 10 of the 12, the attrition rate at the top end of the file was twice as high as the regular donor, the bottom of the pyramid. And that happens because they didn't create a middle donor program which was porous, that allowed donors to climb up and climb down. So they pushed them up through all the different strategies we've talked about, and then because there's not a way for a donor to downgrade in a systematic way and then change the treatment, guess what happens? They lapse. So middle donor programs are really, really, really important. They're important for upgrading, but they're also important for downgrading, and that slows your overall attrition rate. You want to begin by defining the audience, looking for those donors that maybe they're not giving at a high capacity yet, but you've done a wealth overlay or a wealth score. We've talked about that in the past, and you've identified them as someone that has great capacity. Maybe they even give big gifts to other charities. So those folks you want to hard code or hard flag into your middle donor program. Of course, other folks are going to set a predefined range. I like to take my lapse donors who are major donors, so maybe someone that has given $10,000 in the past, but they lapsed 18 to 24 months ago. Instead of putting them back into the major donor treatment and try and force them to make a big gift again, I'll put them into the middle donor program because it's a lower ask amount. It's easier for them to get back into the organization, and as they renew their affinity with the organization by adding zeros to the check, you can push them back up into your major donor program later. So I'll use the mid donor program to acquire lapsed major donors, to upgrade regular donors who have capacity to major donor status, and then of course I'll have a predefined range. As we talked about before, different charities define middle donors different ways, and so some folks will call a middle donor someone that gives single gifts of $100 up to $10,000. Other folks might say, well, if you give under $1,000, you're a regular donor. If you give $1,000 to $9,999, we're going to call that middle, and $10,000 we'll call major. But regardless of your definition, it's important to have it and then stick to it. And then as people who are major donors begin giving at middle donor levels, you have to set up a process. I encourage you to do it on a monthly basis, but certainly do it on a quarterly basis, where you reassign those donors to the middle donor treatment. The other thing that you have to look at with middle donors is offer, and most importantly, frequency. The average charity will have 18 to 24 appeals a year. Yes, you heard me right. 18 to 24 appeals a year, and 18 is a minimum with most charities. Oftentimes for a middle or a major donor, that's just too much frequency. And so you've got to adjust the number of times that you contact them. The other thing that happens is maybe you go from 18 appeals a year for a middle donor to 12. Maybe you go from 18 appeals a year for a regular donor to a major donor, maybe it's 6 appeals a year. But with both middle and major donors, you're going to load up during the fourth quarter of the year, October, November, December. Yep, November, December, you're probably going to do 2 appeals in each of those months. It's just the way it is. Many of these donors probably, I've seen in some charities as many as half of all the income that comes in from these mid-majors happens in fourth quarter. I often say that half of all the giving that happens to your organization is going to happen in fourth quarter. Half of those happens in the month of December. Half of that happens the last week of December, and half of those will happen the last day of December. So just remember how important year end is. The other thing that you really want to look at is setting up a process after every appeal to look at the metrics, because you want to really watch middle donor programs closely. If someone upgrades, and let's say you define middle donors as someone that gives $250 to $999, and then all of a sudden that person that was previously in that window writes a check for $5,000, you want to immediately, of course you're going to thank them in a timely manner, but you want to create a real-time, immediate process to move them into the major donor treatment. Vice versa, if you've got somebody in the middle donor program and you've been doing appeals asking for that middle donor range and they continue to give at the regular donor level, I hate to tell you this, downgrade them, move them into your regular donor treatment where they get more frequency and lower ask amounts, because you want them to give again, and they will upgrade over time as you use your gift array and handles ask amounts to upgrade giving. So they'll come back, but you got to take the time to look at where they're at and to make adjustments using hard flags in some cases and using recency, frequency, dollar amount in other cases for segmentation. Well, listen, I hope that helped you with middle donors. Remember that it is not a static level, that it's a porous level, that you've got donors moving up into it and you've got donors that you want to create a way for them to downgrade into it. Middle donor programs are so important. So have a great weekend. We'll talk to you next week. Fundraising Film Fridays.